See some folks are connecting to audio and some people are coming on. Looks like most people are connected okay. So I will go ahead and get started here. So good evening, everyone. I'm here to welcome all of you to the second session of Sustainable You that we've had so far. It's a series of webinars about all the ways we can work together to make Middleton a more sustainable city. My name is Kelsey, and you can throw in the chat if you're having any kind of issues about volume or seeing things. But just to let you know, if you stop sharing your video, that might help with any connectivity issues that you're having. But again, feel free to throw in the chat feature down. It's probably at the bottom of your screen if you're having any issues. So again, I'm Kelsey, and I'm on the city's sustainability committee. And we have 9 citizen members appointed by the mayor and then approved by council, and along with 1 elected official. We are co-hosting Sustainable You in partnership with the Middleton Public Library. And I really want to thank Liz Zimdars from the Public Library for helping out with all the logistics behind the scenes tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I also want to thank my fellow Sustainability Committee members, Lisa, Christy, and Daphne, along with the Sustainability Coordinator, Kelly Hilliard, for helping plan and organize this series. So a friendly reminder, and I will do it soon as well, keep your line muted if you can, except if you are going to be asking a question after the presentations, but also feel free to use the chat feature as well. So a land acknowledgement: if you are in Middleton or elsewhere in Dane County, we are on land that was forcibly taken from the Ho-Chunk people, and they trace their roots back to the woodland cultures that built the effigy mounds that are on top of Fredericks Hill in the Pheasant Branch Conservancy. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker this evening, Allison Madison. She joins us from Wisconsin Saltwise, where she is a sustainability and development coordinator. And Wisconsin Saltwise is a coalition of organizations from across Wisconsin working together to reduce salt pollution in our lakes, streams, and drinking water. So I know on my way to the bus stop this morning, I passed by a lot more salt than I was expecting, especially with the weather that we had today. So again, remember to mute your line if you haven't already. Post any questions in the chat. And with that, I will turn the floor on over to Allison to begin the program. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you everyone who's joining in this evening. It's a pleasure to speak with all of you, and I welcome your questions and comments, I think, in the chat during the presentation, and then there'll be some Q&A. So this evening, I've been asked to share about salt use reduction strategies that citizens can take in our community. I'm also a Middleton resident. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in here and share a few slides. All right. So a giant mountain of salt. Unfortunately, a scene that has become too blasé for most of us. Living in Wisconsin, especially in southern Wisconsin, where there are some pretty high expectations for winter road conditions. I grew up in northern Wisconsin and definitely had to do a lot more careful winter driving. But in southern Wisconsin, higher population centers, there are some pretty high expectations that municipalities face in terms of keeping roads safe for citizens. Salt is a very effective de-icer. And so especially when drivers are distracted and just not being very defensive, salt is really a great way to help try to keep people safe even in our Wisconsin winters. But we've really come to rely on it very heavily, and that's having a lot of negative impacts on our freshwater ecosystems and our infrastructure. So like Kelsey, done a little bit of walking the last couple days around town and seen really crazy amounts of salt on the sidewalk. So this picture on the left, taken just outside the co-op, Willie Street Co-op on University. And then this photo to the right, I actually took right by Hubbard Avenue Diner, where we see a lot of the damage that salt does. So when we're over applying salt, all of that salt is going to make its way into our fresh water. But along the way, if it's sitting on top of concrete, it can lead to premature aging of our sidewalks. And most of you probably in Middleton are aware that residents get to help pay for the replacement of sidewalks. So that does have an effect on your pocketbook as well as that of the city. So when we're seeing a lot of salt left over, it's a sign there's been an over application, and we really need to work on doing better than this. Salt is a permanent pollutant in our water, and this site should not be acceptable. So what can citizens do? The basic steps for both citizens as well as municipalities are to shovel, scatter, and switch. I included select a certified contractor on here because I just grabbed this as a screenshot off our website. And Wisconsin Saltwise, in conjunction with the city of Madison, does have a Saltwise certification program, both for municipalities, of which a lot of City of Middleton staff have attended, Middleton Cross Plains Area School District staff have attended, and as well as some private contractors, obviously not the ones that are working at the co-op strip mall. But I will talk a little bit more about that later. But shovel, scatter, switch are the key concepts here. You want to get up as much snow and ice as you can mechanically with a shovel, with a scraper, with a broom. Just get it up without relying on chemicals when possible. Then if you do need to use salt, scatter it. Just put down the amount of salt that you need. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about precision applications and what that means for municipalities. Brad might speak to that as well. But it's crazy to believe, but a 12-ounce cup of salt is enough for a 20-foot driveway or 10 sidewalk squares. So just a coffee mug or a cup should be all the salt that you need for an entire driveway. So it's obvious that a lot of people are over-applying. And then switch. When we hit 15 degrees or lower, salt is not effective anymore as a de-icer. And so it's important then not to just continually add more and more salt, but to switch to another material like sand and just try to get some traction on the ice until temperatures go up. So I'm going to dig into these a little bit more, but I did want to add one more to our list of S's: shovel, scatter, switch, and sweep. So if you have over applied or you see a lot of over application in your neighborhood, if you have a free moment, you can sweep that up and reuse that salt. That's the only way that we can prevent it from moving into our waterways unnecessarily. So the key concept is that all of the salt we put down is eventually going to make its way into our water, lakes, streams, or our drinking water. And salt is a permanent pollutant in our water. Chloride, one of the components of salt, sodium chloride, is toxic to aquatic organisms. Naturally in Wisconsin, we have very, very little chloride in our water, 0 to 10 milligrams per liter. But what we're seeing right now is that in most kind of urbanized landscapes, even like Pleasant Branch Creek, for example, is an impaired water body, meaning that the chloride concentrations in the winter are going up above what the DNR recognizes as safe for aquatic organisms, for freshwater organisms. So the EPA's limit is actually lower than the DNR has set their limit, but the DNR has set 395 milligrams per liter or higher of chloride is going to have negative impacts on freshwater organisms if they are in that concentration of salt water for a period of time. And then they've set a secondary limit of 757, saying even a short period of exposure to those higher concentrations are going to have negative impacts on organisms. And in southeastern Wisconsin, the most urbanized part of the state, we're seeing concentrations in the thousands of milligrams per liter. It's not uncommon. So in case milligrams per liter aren't quite your game, to put this in perspective, 1 teaspoon of salt pollutes 5 gallons of water to that 395 milligram per liter threshold. So what I like to say is if you can save 1 teaspoon of salt from going into the water, you're protecting 5 gallons of water. So these are some of the impacts that we see. This research is coming out of the University of Toledo. Bill Hint spoke last year during Wisconsin Salt Awareness Week. So we're seeing impacts on growth of freshwater organisms, reproduction. Not all species are equally sensitive. Some of the most sensitive species are actually zooplankton. Some research coming out of Michigan looks like zooplankton can actually be affected by chloride concentrations in the around 100 milligrams per liter. So Michigan's actually just lowered their toxicity standard. But what we see is that zooplankton populations are going to start to decline. Total abundance goes down. If there are less zooplankton around, what does that mean? There are less things eating algae. What does that mean? More algae, more green, murky water. So salt and phosphorus in our lakes can definitely be coexisting kind of stressors and play off one another. And high concentrations of salt can actually lead to the release of more phosphorus from our water, the sediments in our lake and into our water. Also, as we have less zooplankton, there's less food going up the food chain, so fewer fish. Add to that salt water is more dense than fresh water. So as you're putting salt into our lakes, as they're loading with salt water, that salt is not distributed equally throughout the water column. There's more heavy, dense salt water at the bottom of the lakes, and that prevents natural lake turnover because the bottom, the salty layer does not want to come up to the surface. And lake turnover is natural in Wisconsin and seasonal. A lot of our lakes, both spring and fall, and it helps redistribute oxygen and nutrients throughout the water column. So if we end up in what's called cultural meromixis, meaning because of humans, lakes not mixing anymore, we're really wreaking havoc on the ecosystem. Do not have any lakes, thankfully, in this situation yet in Wisconsin. There are some in New York State as well as Minnesota. But we do see that the chloride concentrations are steadily climbing in all of the Yahara lakes. So again, here, milligrams per liter of chloride over the decades since we've been applying road salt. Lake Bingor being the smallest, least ability to dilute that salt, highest concentrations. We're also seeing chloride concentrations go up in our groundwater. So I was able to get this data from City of Middleton, our municipal drinking well. So you drink tap water like I do, means we're getting some amount of chloride now, where our water is coming to us pre-salted in the tap. Sodium likely as well. I don't have the data on that. So this is definitely something that we should be talking about as a community, as we have no limits, right, on how much salt people are putting down. That salt's traveling into our water that most of us depend upon. So the Wisconsin Saltways Partnership started in the Madison area about 10 years ago with the organizations you see here with their logos. And last year, actually this year in 2021, I've been able to connect with a number of organizations across the state and increase the size of this partnership. And we're now working thanks to the Fund for Lake Michigan statewide and doing work across Wisconsin. So the saltways practices that we work to promote are, again, that shovel, scatter, switch. So when it comes to municipalities, it means decreasing the amount of snow at which you take the plow out. Instead of trying to just burn snow off with salt, plowing first, right, mechanical first. A number of communities are only plowing until their last run, and then they'll salt, but they're not putting salt down to just plow off the roads in the middle of the storm. Again, then after shovel, scatter, right? Applying salt only as needed. So part of that It involves calibrating your equipment and making sure that when you want to put down 200 pounds per lane mile, you're putting down 200 pounds per lane mile. So that's a big step here. So we can see in Cudahy, just south of Milwaukee, before calibrating, their truck thought they were putting down 300 pounds. They were actually putting down 850 pounds. So calibration can really make a huge difference. So shovel, scatter, and then switch. Communities can also switch to sand when sodium chloride is not effective, but there are also other tools like brine to use as well. And I'm gonna let Brad get into this because I think I'm running a little shorter in time here. So also working with the Bruce Company and other private landscaping companies and snow removal companies. We provide free workshops, work with a consultant who developed a training class for the state of Minnesota, and they provide these classes, and we're able to then make them available free of charge to municipal and private winter maintenance professionals. In 2021, we hosted 9 equipment open houses across the state to bring winter maintenance professionals together to talk about best practices. We have monthly webinars where, again, private winter maintenance professional citizens can learn more about best practices. We had someone from the Mayo Clinic talk about how the Mayo Clinic in Rochester has drastically reduced their salt use, and we're gonna have one on brine reclamation coming up. So brine reclamation, speaking of water softeners, and water softener brine, the Madison wastewater treatment plant is one of over 40 in the state that's discharging salt at rates that are higher than we know is healthy into local streams. And it's true of most wastewater treatment plants in hard water areas. So this summer did an installation out in Lake Wingra to try to raise awareness. So I don't think we have time to talk about this right now, but it would be great to talk about water softeners because they also contribute to freshwater salinization. And there are alternatives. So I would just say, keep an eye out for Salt Awareness Week and work to learn more about this problem and what's being done. So Salt Awareness Week is great, promote those training opportunities. If you want to get involved in chloride monitoring efforts, there are options for that. And then just continue to spread the word. So I'm happy to speak to another group. If you're interested in getting involved locally, please do reach out. And it always is great to have more followers on our social media. So that's a really easy way to like and share what's being done and spread the word. So with that, I can take any questions.
Hi, Allison. You're doing great on time. So if you are able to speak.
Okay, I thought I only had 15 minutes, so okay.
If I am so curious about water softeners, and I know Lisa is too, so I bet we're not alone. So if you can speak a bit about water softeners.
I would be glad to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, great. You can take some of my time to speak about that too.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Yeah, so actually I will pop ahead here. So this is a water softener. These are my extra slides in case anyone asked. So most water softeners, salt-based softeners, are ion exchange softeners. They bring in, when you're bringing in your water from the well in this part of the state, has a lot of calcium and magnesium in it. It's been sitting in limestone, dolomitic limestone. And calcium and magnesium can cause scale on pipes, in water heaters, in your tea kettle, right? People don't want that problem. So what we do is we run it through a water softener. And as the calcium and magnesium come through, they're grabbed by resin beads and they take the place, they pop off sodium ions. And your water comes to you softened, meaning it's had sodium added to it. The calcium and magnesium have come out. And then we recharge it, right? So you dump salt in, the water sits in that salt, the salty water comes through the resin tank, the sodium gets trapped by that resin bead, the calcium and magnesium are flushed out along with the chloride. So chloride is just a carrier, and then it's recharged and able to soften more water. So that soft water though, and all the discharge is going to the wastewater treatment plant. And wastewater treatment plants they're not magic, right? They cannot remove salt water. Just like we can't pull salt water out of, the ocean, or pull salt out of the ocean water, pull salt out of our lakes. We can't pull salt out of wastewater. It's extremely energy intensive, and it would have huge greenhouse gas implications, as well as being extremely costly. So all of that salt is going on, it's being discharged into our streams. So things that individuals can do, excuse me for the rapid click here. So make sure that your water softener is optimized. I can send out a link. The wastewater treatment plant has a lot of information, but they can also get you started and then hook you up with a local professional that can do an optimization. You really want to make sure that your water softener is only recharging when needed. So if you have an old timer-based system that recharges every 2 or 3 days, those are extremely inefficient. It would be like emptying out your gas tank every Sunday just because and refilling it with gasoline. You wouldn't do that, right? But our water softeners, if they're timer-based, are doing that with the salt. And then you also can make sure that your water softener is only softening cold water, or excuse me, I put down cold only, just did that, as only softening hot water and not cold water. You don't need to soften water going to your toilet. You don't need to soften, definitely don't want to soften the water that you're drinking and you're just, ingesting sodium, right? So just softening the hot water, and that is a layer of protection for your hot water heater. Brine reclamation is something that I think has a lot of, there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of promise. This is a picture of Mike Gresh, who is a maintenance manager at the Lucky Building in downtown Madison. And he actually pulls all the water softener discharge from the giant water softeners in the basement of that building. And he uses that as his de-icer in the winter. And so he's not buying extra salt to put down in the winter. He's pulling salt out of the wastewater stream and then using that and using liquid brine. It's best practice also for winter de-icing. And then finally, there's more and more coming out about salt-free alternatives. And I actually have some students at Purdue right now that are doing a little research into a few of them that are commercially available. There's someone in the Madison area who's had a salt-free one for about 12 years. He's a green architect and knew about these technologies. They're very common in Europe, but just not pushed here. We have a salt-based softener industry that makes a lot of money selling us those devices and selling us that salt. And so it's kind of hard to change the status quo around this, but it's something that really needs to happen. So that's what I've got. If there are any other questions about water softeners or anything else, happy to take them if I have more time.
Yes, there is a question or two here in the chat, and one person says, just as the city trucks do when they spray the roads, have you seen any kind of consumer sprayer of salt in solution with water?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so brine, like the city uses, I think the city, Brad can talk about this, just pre-wets, but doesn't anti-ice. But putting brine down before the storm, if you're just doing straight liquid brine, works like putting oil on your skillet, and the snow can come up a lot more easily. Personally, I still don't want to use brine at home because I feel like if I can get out there with a shovel, I don't necessarily need to use brine, and brine still is salt, if you're still putting salt down. But if, that's something that you feel like for you would really help you to make sure you're getting the snow up and not needing to use rock salt. And I know there are some trouble spots, like maybe your super shaded area, that brine could be helpful. I am working actually with a group of UW-Madison students that we're working on a little DIY brine kit for homeowners. And so it was a tool kind of like, actually they're just modifying a pesticide sprayer and putting, so like a little backpack sprayer. And that they were doing some practices with that. Obviously we haven't had a lot of snow this year, but that's been the one thing that I've seen. I've also heard about people just like spraying it. But I feel like the pesticide sprayer, if that's something you're interested in, would be probably the best way to go.
Great. And I think there was a slide that you had about upcoming January salt
Yep.
wise.
Yeah, so the end of January, we're going to be hosting the second annual Wisconsin Salt Awareness Week. So it will be a series of webinars over the noon hour from 12:30 to 1. And we're going to have a variety of speakers talking about what impacts salt has in our freshwater ecosystems to organisms that live in those waters, the salt that's going into our drinking water. We're going to have a couple people talking about opportunities to teach about salt in the classroom or to kids, and have a veterinarian. So it's going to be a mix of folks that can provide information about all facets of this problem.
Fabulous. And if you can leave that up there, I think, so we can take in more of that information. And I'll ask you another question here. Is there more info on alternative no salt water softeners that you might have?
Yeah, I do have some information up on the website along with there's a video of the gentleman I mentioned in Madison who has a salt-free device. It uses EMF, electromagnetic frequency to prevent the scale formation. There are also TAC or template assisted crystallization systems that I know a few people have just recently purchased in Madison. I don't have a lot of like long-term data on this. And I know the sewage treatment plant has kind of been cautious to, tell people you really need to buy this alternative in case it wouldn't, work well. But I'm pushing next year to actually run what I want to call the Saltwise Challenge and have people pilot some of these alternative systems and try them out in the Madison area and work to promote that and change that norm.
Fantastic. Another question that came in is about our four-legged friends. Do you recommend or have any thoughts about washing off dog paws? Is there any research that you know about dogs licking salt or having it on their skin? I know a lot of dogs love salty flavors, and could that be something that could be bad for them? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so like I said, during Salt Awareness Week, we're gonna have a veterinarian speak to this issue. We did actually have one speak last year, so I can put in the chat the link to that webinar, which is archived on our YouTube. But I would say the big takeaways, I don't have a dog right now myself, so I wasn't, maybe the most attentive listener to that particular podcast, but is that yes, it is a good idea, good practice to wipe off the dog's paws so you don't have that salt kind of like embedding in the paw. You probably don't need to be too concerned about your dog eating salt or licking some salt. Salt is good for us in limited quantities, right? And most animals are going to stop themselves before it would be too much. You don't have to worry about your dog eating enough salt to have some sort of toxic reaction. I don't know so much, if there are different additives in the salt, but I think my guide is telling me that the dog probably wouldn't eat too much of that, but maybe you know your animal better than I do. So that's all I'll say. And then I will put the podcast link in there.
Yeah, that would be great. I am a very fervent dog lover, so anything that I need to know about my dog, I would love to get that podcast link. So I would appreciate that, and I think we have gone through the questions at this point. But feel free, everybody, to keep popping them in the chat as you think of them. But I think at this point we can switch on over to our second speaker this evening, and it's Brad Hopwood, and he is the operations manager for the city of Middleton. So we can dive right in, and you can take it away, Brad.
All right, just give me a second here. All right. As she stated, my name is Brad Hopwood. I'm the operations manager for Department of Public Works for the city of Middleton. So I'm just going to talk about what we've been doing in the past year leading up to now on how we've been able to reduce our salt use in our roads by nearly half in the last about 5 or 6 years. So I've been talking with the Middleton Cross Plains Area School District about using less salt as well, because I noticed that they use quite a bit. And they actually sent all their personnel that are involved in snow and ice fighting to the salt waste program to learn, and they learned quite a bit there. And they continue to encourage our employees to use less salt. We've also sent our public lands and utility crews through the same program, and as well as our streets department guys, and they've also learned quite a bit. And we were able to get out of that mindset of, well, this is how it's always been done, and into the mindset of, well, yeah, it's always been done this way, but there's a better way we can do it, and there's a more effective, efficient way we can go about things without using so much salt. With that said, when I started talking with our lead mechanic about salt reduction, and one of the things that he brought up was getting closed loop systems on all of our plow trucks. And to give you a quick idea what a closed loop system is, it's a self-controlled system by the vehicle, but it's controlled by the vehicle's motion and speed. So if the truck's going 20 miles an hour down the road, it knows exactly how much salt to apply to the road and how much brine to pre-wet that salt with. If it stopped, it knows not to put any salt down. And that was actually pretty big, because there was times where, and I'm sure people have seen it, still see it, I seen it today driving home from work, where you're at an intersection and there's just a pile of salt right there. We're able to stop doing that now, which is great news for us and for the environment. But we started getting data from Veritech, which is our vendor that we use our salt waste system with. And we're able to input that into our computer systems within our trucks, and we notice a dramatic change in the amount of salt we put down since we started pre-wetting with an actual closed loop system. There was a lot of issues with this in the beginning, getting funding with one of them, but also trying to convert our trucks to it. We noticed if everybody here is probably from Middleton or they've seen a cul-de-sac, they're not easy to turn around in, let alone with a giant salt truck. So we had to get single axle trucks to plow those with, and in doing so, we had to customize our trucks. So we had to move our tires a few inches towards the front of the truck just to be able to fit a brine tank in where the batteries used to be. So we had to take the batteries off the frame of the truck, put them inside the cab of the truck to put a brine tank on the side of the truck. But that helped us continue to be able to go with this system that saved us so much on brine. And we have 8 trucks that we have that with, and then we have 2 one-ton trucks that our utilities and public lands use to salt. And right now we're still in talks with our vendor about getting a pre-wet system for those, but we don't have a timeline or a cost projected out for that yet. So 2008, we started a pre-wet system, and it was 2008. There wasn't really computer technology for a salting truck available yet. So what we did at that time, it was a manual system. So basically, they just turned a knob in the truck and they hoped for the best. It worked. It helped out by reducing salt a little bit then, but we also noticed that you use excessive still. So come around 2017 timeframe, we noticed we were talking with one of the vendors out there, and they talked to us about a closed loop system. And I've explained what the closed loop system is already, but we were able to kind of piece together a closed loop system. By we, I mean our lead mechanic, Brian Gebhardt. He put one together to put into a truck, and at the beginning or at the middle of the 2017-18 season, we were able to get that truck on the road, and we started collecting the data as soon as we could on that, and we realized that truck used a lot less salt than any other truck we had out there. As you'll see in this next slide, so 2015-16, we had 6 brining events. So we do brine the roads. Sometimes we do anti-ice. It doesn't happen as often as I'd like, but with us not having a brine mixer, we don't have the capabilities of that. So we have to get our brine prior to winter from the county. So brine, usually they was recommended to us that you mix it prior to a storm, so you know the right calculation to put in there. At any rate, in 2015-16, we're using about 44 ton of salt per event, which that's a lot of salt to put down. With 75 lane miles, that's quite a bit. And we started to see a trend kind of go down here. But if you notice here in 2020, 2021 season, we were down to averaging 23 ton per event. And I mean, this is all weather driven. So if we have an ice event, obviously we have to use more. If there's rain that washes the salt off, and then all of a sudden we get a snow, you know, you're generally getting more, which doesn't help us. But at the same time, we have to work with what we have. And I'll say this as well: Middleton does not have a clear road policy. So if there's a little bit of snow here and there, we're not going to pound it with salt. We're just going to leave it if we can't get it up with our plow. This last event that we had Saturday morning, when we went out to plow, we actually were down to 21.5 ton for that event. So that was great news. So if anybody has any questions on this stuff, please feel free to send that in the chat. So this just gets into the system a little bit. So we work with Force America Hydraulics and Veritech Liquid Controls, which is actually owned by Force America. And what we've been trying to do is make everything standardized at the city. So if something breaks, we have something there. And this has helped us standardize our equipment, which has helped us save money with also using less salt. We also got a representative from Force America to come in and train all of our crew members on how to properly calibrate this system. Because before it was one of those, I think this is right. This way we're actually able to calibrate. So we can actually track how much salt we're using, how much brine we're using each event, where our problem areas are, you know, go from there. And just to give you an idea, I know I showed you on the last slide what we did for averaging on salt usage. When we throw the brine on it, when we pre-wet it, we use about 4 gallons of brine per lane mile. And then if we do the whole entire city, it's between 4,000 and 5,000 gallons of brine if we just use brine. So the picture on the screen here is a 51EX controller. So it has 3 settings that allow the operator to use. They can do 150 pounds per lane mile. These are preset settings. 150 pounds per lane mile, 300 pounds per lane mile, or 400 pounds per lane mile. And like any other city, there are problem areas, there's hills, there's dangerous curves. There's spots where you just can't, you can't get out of the shadow, so the ice always likes to accumulate there. For stuff like that, they do have a blast option that it's not used very often, but that would put down 800 pounds per lane mile, and when it's activated, it only goes for 8 seconds. After all that stuff is said and done, the data is stored in there, and then they can figure out how much salt to use in pounds, how much brine they use. Then we take that data, we input into our system for all of our trucks, and we see what we're starting to average and where we can see savings from salt usage. The other picture is the sander auger sensor. That component calculates the amount of granular salt pushed to the spinner prior to it being applied to the roadway. So just give me a quick second here, sorry. So basically, it works as an auger. That's what stops it from being pushed out once the vehicle stops. It's what tells it how much to put out once it's going. And then the spray nozzle, that component, that's what was used to spray the salt with brine prior to it hitting the road. And the reason why we like to do that is it activates the salt. And if there's a little bit of snow there, they'll stick right to that snow and start melting it instantly, rather than it just sitting there waiting to get activated from it being wet. So when it's pre-wet, it activates immediately and it starts melting right away, which is great news for us. And then that's a brine holding tank. It holds about 100 gallons of brine, which would, and then you'll see the next component that pumps that brine to the spinner. And this is pretty much, this is a big component for it. This one is the one that's more liable to have issues. I know Jefferson was asking what we do to keep ours running, because they're not cheap. They're about $500 a piece. And what ends up happening is they get a lot of brine in there, obviously, because the brine goes through there and it builds up, and then it just clogs and they can't get unclogged. Nothing they can do works. And our mechanic actually has a desalter that is saved for this system that I told Jefferson how to use it, and I think they're going to be better off this way. It's the flow meter and pump. Basically, the flow meter is what calculates the amount of brine that's going to get sprayed at the spinner, and the pump is the one that just pumps it out there. So, you guys have any questions?
Yes, looks like we have a handful of questions here. The first one that came in is, have you had any success interacting with the public on getting public acceptance for staying off the roads during and following snow ice events until crews are done plowing and applying de-icing materials?
The short and long answer is no. We have not had any success with that. And I understand, people have things they want to do. They want to get going. They want to get out. And some people aren't going to let a storm stop them. I mean, it's all over Wisconsin that happens. People are just going to go when they want to go. So we haven't had any success with asking people to stay home. We encourage it, but we don't really have much success with that.
Sure. The next one that came in says, just out of curiosity, has there been an observed reduction in automobile corrosion as salt reduction practices have been implemented?
You know what? I'm not sure. I know. You know what? If you want to email me that question, whoever asked that question, they can email me at this email, and I can get an answer for you. Because our mechanic's been trying to track some of that with our work trucks, and I know he's been working with body shops in the area as well. So, if you want to email me that question, that'd be great, and I can try to get an answer for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. The next one that came in is talking about when you mentioned having to customize the trucks. Do you think demand for the brining function will lead to vendors making this a standard feature so you won't need to customize, or do you think they're not so in that camp?
It depends, because the trucks we buy internationals for this, and they just come standard the way they are. But we have a really good working relationship with Lakeside International on the east side of Madison there. And when I say customize, I mean the first few trucks we did this with, it was a bear to do. But now they know if we're ordering a single axle truck, that's the specs that we ordered in. So they're able to do that for us prior to getting it to us.
Excellent. A couple more here that have come in. One person just had a comment. They said, great work reducing salt while still keeping the roads safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great news that the city of Middleton has made so much progress to reduce salt use. Thank you for all your efforts. That was another person. This is for either Brad or Allison. If both of you want to jump in on this. Is there a concerted effort? And I just lost it. Oh no. Oh, here it is. Is there a concerted effort to reach out to contractors so they can fine tune their own operations and cut down on salt and save money?
I think that's a great question for Allison, because I know she did mention Bruce Company, and I know I've trolled through your website and I've seen there's a lot of private contractors on there, so I'll let her field that
Yeah, so Wisconsin Saltwise does work to get more private contractors on board. Unfortunately, Lisa, that question makes the assumption that private contractors are going to make more money if their salt costs go down. But sometimes the way that contracts are set up end up contractors get paid more when they put more salt down sometimes. So one of the worst places in Middleton, actually, I've gone and I visited, and what can happen when you've got, someone, a landlord who maybe isn't around, who contracts out with a company, the tenant who's around, maybe even agrees there's way too much salt going down, but you have all these layers and it's hard to get actually to the contractor. And one of the worst places I visited a couple times, and what I've learned is that there's one company that does the shoveling and the snow removal, and there's another company that comes just to salt. And they actually get paid by the amount of salt that they put down. So the incentive there is to do more salting. So that's something that with Wisconsin Saltwise, we're trying to reach both the private contractors, but also the clients so that they understand this issue and that they will restructure those contracts.
Wow. That is quite the discovery to chew on. It looks like Kelly is raising her hand, and I don't know if you then typed in the chat what you wanted to put forth, Kelly, but if you want to share with us.
Hi, yeah, I'm the sustainability coordinator, and I just wanted to highlight and give kudos to Brad and his team, his staff. They recently, just a few days ago, won an award from the county, a Dane County Climate Champions Award for reducing salt use by 50%. So it was a really nice, I think, shout out to Middleton's work and innovation. And I want to thank Brad and his team for doing that. It's not easy when you're busy with collecting brush and running the recycling center and all the other operations to then innovate and reduce salt. It's an extra step. So thank you for that. And also I wanted to thank Allison Madison as well, because she spearheaded one of the first municipal water softener audits in Middleton earlier this year. And we walked around all the buildings in the city government of Middleton and looked at every single softener and evaluated how much salt was being used in them to identify which ones we could use less salt or optimize or seek grant funding to update. So it's on our radar and we're working on it. So I just wanted to highlight those two things. Thanks.
Excellent. Those are both wonderful two things to learn about this evening. And I guess following from that, someone asked, Brad, can you comment about how much the city has saved reducing salt use, or any projections that there might be out there?
So, I mean, salt, like everything, the price has gone up. Unfortunately, from 2014 to now, it's gone up by about $25 a ton. And that's if you were on the state contract. So we're on the state contract. In 2014, I believe it was, I could be misquoting this. We were told, you know, we wanted 1,300 tons of salt. And then they had a big year of snow that year, and it turns out they needed more. So then they had to pay a lot more money for that salt. They got worried. They wanted to get more salt, just to, you know, save money. And then I noticed once we started using this system, we're able to not have to say, hey, we need to have 1,500 tons of salt in here all the times. That 900 tons, that's a holdover from last year. We only are on the contract for 1,000 tons now, and we expect that to keep shrinking. So I don't have an actual number for you, but I can tell you that we have saved, and I know that because I go through our budget probably once or twice a month, and the amount of money we have left over in the salting budget is a lot more than we have ever had in the past. So I don't know the exact number. I can probably go through and look for it if you want me to get the exacts.
Cool, thank you. Another question that came in, it says, awesome work on updating Middleton's trucks and equipment. Have you heard of any trucks or other winter de-icing equipment available with alternatives to diesel fuel? For example, compressed natural gas or electric, etc.
So I can tell you the electric is not going to be there for a while with these heavier duty trucks, just because there's so much strain on them, and it's really hard on a truck to do snow and ice fighting. And I know the county was using, and I think they still do use, compressed natural gas. Unfortunately, our building is not set up for that right now. And that's a huge upgrade to do. And compressed natural gas, it's not the route that our mechanics really want to go with, because it takes up so much space for that tank compared to a fuel tank. I will also say this, since we have such a high turnover rate of our trucks. We don't have trucks that are more than 10 years old for plowing, or 10 or 11 years old. We meet California's restrictions on emissions. So we're top tier with emissions, but we can just get kicked over to finding a technology that can actually use electric to push the truck through and do the job, and we'll be, we're hitting on all cylinders, but right now it's just not there. And that's the same. I mean, I go through our fleet. I'm actually in the process of putting together a 5-year plan to move us forward to electric vehicles within our fleet.
Fabulous.
Not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we're going to have all electric vehicles in 5 years, but we're starting to push that forward.
Fantastic. Well, Brad has generously put his email there. If you're lying awake at night and you suddenly think of the perfect question that you want to ask, he's very generous there, giving his email. And Allison has put a lot of cool links in the chat if you want to check those out. And just in case anybody, again, is needing to go back, or if you know someone that would be interested in this, the video of this session will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. So we would love it if you shared it. And we also welcome your feedback on tonight's session, and we will share a link in a quick online evaluation form in an email follow-up. So check that out. And in February, we will be back on the 8th of February with a Green Your Routine sustainable use session. So Lisa has very wonderfully put the evaluation of tonight's session also in the chat if you just want to get that done and over with while it's still fresh in your mind. I'm looking here to see if there are any last questions. Looks like no, but I will take the opportunity to thank Allison and Brad so much for sharing their expertise with us tonight and sharing all the good things that are happening on this topic. And thank you so much to everyone who helped put this on again. And thank you to everyone who came here tonight. So again, it'll be up on the YouTube page of the public library if you need to reference anything. So thanks so much.